Hi, I'm Mark Gaylor. I'm a Sony Alpha Imaging Ambassador. I've been testing Sony's FE 135 f1.8 GM lens. Now, being a G Master piece of glass, it falls into Sony's premium lens lineup. And Sony have certainly been kicking goals in recent years with their lens design. DP Review voted the 24 GM lens of the year last year, and the year before that it was another GM lens, that time the 1635 f2.8 GM. Now, being a premium lens design, it goes without saying it is pin sharp. In fact, some people have been saying this could possibly be the sharpest lens ever made. Now, one of the things that you may be considering if you're looking at this movie is would I own a 135 prime lens, or maybe it should be the 85. Now, both of them are built for bokeh, 11 curved aperture blades. It doesn't matter whether you shoot wide open or slightly stopped down, you're still going to get beautifully smooth bokeh. Now, there are some differences in performance, although I can make, on the face of it, both lenses appear to give the same figure ground separation. If I shoot wide open on the 85 1.4, it gives a very similar equivalent focal length to the 135. Admittedly, on the A7R III, I'm only pulling 18 megapixels now, but we do get that similar sort of a look. So given that, would you actually want to own both? Now, I'm going to just run through a couple of images, and I'll cut to full screen so you can see these. Now, I would encourage you to either look at these images on my Flickr Pro account on a 4K monitor, or watch this movie in 4K. Now, the first image that I'm going to be taking a look at is actually also shot with a short telephoto GM lens. It's actually the 100 STF lens. It behaves like a 2.8, so we're not going to get as much figure ground separation as these two babies here, but it does have some very silky smooth bokeh, which is quite a unique feature of the STF. Now, I was shooting in low ambient light just as the sun was setting. Now, I did stop using the STF because I decided I wouldn't be using introduced lighting through fill lights such as flashlight. So the first image is with the STF, but in later situations where the ambient light is even lower, I stopped shooting with the STF just because the ISO was too high, and obviously shooting with these very wide apertures, I could carry on shooting handheld without any flash. And I really love that soft evening light for shooting portrait. The next image that we're looking at is actually shot with the 135, and we can see much better figure ground separation. To be honest, when you're looking at these, the images will look very similar in sharpness. I'm really just wanting you to look at the separation between that background and what we refer to as the bokeh. And in the same location, I then went on to shoot with the 85 at the 1.4 aperture, and we're getting that same sort of bokeh in the background. Now, I am shooting in the APS-C mode, and that's to give me the equivalent of close to 135 millimeters. That puts me at the same working distance using both the 135 and 85. Now, had I not chosen to shoot in APS-C mode, I would have had to step further forward. Obviously, the 85 is going to get a bigger field of view, so that would encourage me to step forward 3 or 4 paces to get that similar angle of view. So what I decided to do was to shoot with both at the similar focal length. So when the light gets lower, we're up to about 1000 ISO now, so I've stopped shooting with the STF because we would be over 4000 ISO on that STF because of its 5.6 t-stop. So this one is with the 135, and the next image that I'm showcasing is captured with the 85. Now, some people will be able to pick the slightly different bokeh, but given both are using circular apertures with 11 blades, there is a very similar appearance to the figure ground separation on these two lenses. And as the light gets even lower now, we're up to about 2000 ISO on the 135. Okay, and so we're getting quite good handling of noise, but obviously we are going to lose a little bit of ultra sharp detail because of the raised ISO. Still, we're getting that lovely sort of figure ground separation and the lovely bokeh in the background with the lights coming on in the evening. And the same situation shot with the 85mm. So as you can see, quite a similar look. So one might question, okay, so if I've got an 85 and I'm shooting at 1.4 and I am shooting on an A7R, so I do have the option of shooting in APS-C mode, do I really need the 135? So I've got some examples of bokeh here in this folder to show you. I've just grabbed an image shot in a laneway, handheld again. This one is with the 135. I've just focused on that the bicycle basket in the foreground, and we're looking at some bokeh figure ground separation now. So I'm shooting wide open at the f1.8 aperture. I'm just going to zoom in so you can see the fine detail of the flowers in the basket there. It is absolutely rich in detail, pin sharp. So the same scene shot with the 85, again in that APS-C mode, we get a similar sort of figure ground separation. Again, I'm shooting at the 1.4 aperture, and if I'm zooming in, you may notice a couple of artifacts, which is common when we're shooting with these 1.4 lenses wide open. And that is an artifact called color fringing. It's slightly different from the chromatic aberration that programs like Capture One and Lightroom can remove. Where we see this visible is maybe an ultra bright highlight such as the chrome on the handlebars, and it's giving a little bit of a cyan green kick on the edge there, which is a little bit more difficult to remove. It's not impossible, but it's just another step that we have to take in post-production in order to remove that. And you may notice there's a little gap in the basket where a light is shining through, and there's a little bit of a magenta kick coming off that edge, and that was completely absent when shooting with the 135 1.8. Another bokeh shot with the 135, I actually defocused a shot to show you how beautiful the bokeh is on that 135, even when we're stopping down to maybe 2.8. I have noticed on some of the Batis lenses, when you stop down from wide open, you get sort of a hexagonal bokeh ball because we're not using those 11 curved apertures on those Batis lenses. Now, I have really enjoyed using the 135 2.8 Batis. One of the things that I didn't like about the Batis is there's no focus hold on the barrel of the lens, which I often use for IAF or programming for another function. So I do actually prefer the GM lens designers with those focus hold buttons on the barrel of the lens there. So there's an example of shooting at 2.8 and still getting beautiful circular bokeh. Now, you may notice that if you put circular bokeh balls into the corner of most lenses, they don't stay circular. They will adopt a sort of an elliptical shape, sometimes referred to as cat's eye bokeh. If this is something that you're not wanting to happen, then you would possibly look at Sony's 100 STF lens. This is the lens in Sony's lens lineup that does keep that circular bokeh circular even in the extreme corners of the image. Having said that, when you're shooting at the time of the day where these bokeh balls are apparent, you're shooting in often very low light, and you possibly then want to be using flash, off-camera flash for the subject. So it's a swing and roundabout type of scenario there. You do have an advantage with the wider aperture 135 and 85 primes. So one of the other advantages, and I'll just go through some fast action shots that I've been shooting with the 135. Now, Sony are advertising dual linear motors. Now, I first saw one of these motors on the 400 prime, which also could well have been the lens of the year last year. I really enjoyed using that ultra fast lens. And as I go through these examples, you'll see that the image is not only capturing these cyclists pin sharp, but it's also tracking them seamlessly. Now, I'm cropped into 1:1 on these images so you can see how sharp these images are, and I'm pairing these images up so you can see I've locked on at a greater distance, and the lens is tracking them much closer to the camera. So as I go through these examples, you'll see absolutely pin sharp images, even though your subjects are moving. Now, Sony advertise moving portraits on their website, but yeah, I mean, this is tracking portraits when they're speeding towards me on cycles and motorized scooters, and it's absolutely seamless. So now the 85 1.4 I don't think is a slow focusing lens, but it's not the first port of call when I'm going shooting action sports. And just like the Zeiss Batis 135, I wouldn't be deterred from using this in a sports action scenario, maybe as an alternative to the 70-200 GM lens. Okay, so as I'm going through these images, you can see just over shooting over a 20-minute period on a cycle path, a huge success rate at nailing subject there. Now we'll go over to a broad range of subjects, just wandering around events. I love using the 135 focal length for shooting at events. Occasionally when I'm shooting with a 70-200 zoom, I'm often around that 135 focal length. I have used the STF in APS-C mode, which is 150, and I have used the 85 lens at events in APS-C mode, giving a 1 to 7.5mm equivalent. Having said that, I do think the 85mm is the perfect focal length for shooting tight head and shoulders when you're working with a subject. It does eliminate the risk of people walking between you and your subject. Stepping back a little with the 135, you occasionally have somebody walking between you and the lens, so you do occasionally miss and break that connection with your subject. But it is, having said that, a comfortable working distance at events. Let's just go through some of these images. A young girl sitting on a wall. You can see the parents, they're not a million miles away, but we're getting that extreme figure ground separation. So one of the things that I love in creating my particular style of images is always creating figure ground separation, always making sure that the viewer is in no doubt about what it is they're looking at. Sometimes I'm using composition for that figure ground separation, sometimes color separation, but often with these short and medium telephoto lenses, working with figure ground separation using depth of field, and we're getting significant separation with these telephoto lenses, even if we've got the subject quite close to the background. One of the things that these short telephoto lenses will do, they will flatten out images, they will flatten perspective, the exact opposite of using wide angle. So it gives a very alternative, different look to street photography that some people perhaps are not used to seeing. I typically do use a wide angle 35mm or 35mm equivalent lens when shooting street, but I do like shooting this just these short telephoto street, just to mix up the feeling and the look of the subjects that I'm shooting. So as you can see here, getting lovely figure and ground separation on these subjects, even when the subjects are quite close to the background, as I pointed out. Now again, with this 135, you can sort of go unnoticed in street photography just by using the flip screen, silent shooting mode, and putting the camera at waist level. Sometimes a lot of characters, if they're busy going about their business, don't notice a photographer at work. This beautiful picture of a woman in traditional costume is actually just about to get on a tram. You can see all of the other people in the queue are just absolutely separated out, so we get that great figure ground separation, which I think is perfect for portraiture. So some more street photographs in low, dimly lit alleyways, and this is really working well in these scenarios, as you can see. Again, sort of tracking and using IAF on this lens. I have owned a 135 SEL lens for the old A mount, but really I was looking forward to having this 1.3F for faster focusing and also seamless IAF when working at these ultra shallow depth of fields. And having said that, with the A9 and the A7R3 cameras, getting a really high hit rate, which tends to go with using very wide apertures with these lenses. You do find a great success rate when using IF in these situations. One of the advantages of the 135 in very low ambient light is if you are shooting in AFS mode and you are stopped down, the camera will open its aperture momentarily to pull focus. This is something that the 85 doesn't naturally want to do unless you go and switch off the setting effect in the live view display options, which forces that aperture to open to a wider aperture. A lot of people using the 85 1.4 in a studio situation with modeling lights on the flash have noticed a very poor focus performance, because when stopping down to f8 and f11 the camera is struggling to find enough light. The solution to that obviously is just switching off that setting effect, but that isn't something that you necessarily have to do with the 135 in AFS mode, because it automatically wants to open momentarily wide to focus quickly. I'll post these images, as I've said, to my album of Ultra HD 4K images, and really you'll be wanting to see these out on a 4K monitor to get the full effect of this. 3 examples shot with an 85, 135 and 100 STF. You'll notice the 100 STF, which is the third shot, I've had to go a little bit closer again to push the bokeh further out of focus because of its slightly smaller aperture than the wide aperture 135 and 85mm lenses. Shooting a broad range of subjects at wide open on that 135, showing you how you can work that figure ground separation. This is a wildlife. It's obviously not an ideal wildlife lens unless you can get really close to your subject, but again, shooting with an A7R3 you do have that crop ability. Okay, and when the bird takes flight, you can be pretty much guaranteed the 135 will track that seamlessly. I'm pretty much finishing up with this presentation. And if you've enjoyed looking at the examples and you enjoyed this review, you may want to head over to my website. All of my resources, learning resources, are free to download. You can make a donation if you found them really valuable to you, but don't be afraid just to download them for free if that's what you need to do. Okay, so thumbs up if you've enjoyed the information presented in this information, and I'll catch you online. Okay, I'm Mark Gaylor. I'm a Sony Alpha Imaging Ambassador.